Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us Craig Melby, who is founder of LeaseSmart, LLC. Welcome to the program, Craig.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, so I love seeing business names that kind of explain what the business is in the name, as opposed to back in the day before anyone knew what Amazon was. You know, it's like, what's Amazon? Yeah. So LeaseSmart obviously means you help people get smart leases. So give us a little bit of your background and how you got started in the business of LeaseSmart.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm happy to do it. I've been in commercial real estate for many, many years, more than I want to admit to. And part of my original work was managing and leasing shopping centers. And so we would have typically the mom and pop, the small companies, the hair salons and the pizza and, everything else. They'd come to us, and it was obvious that they did not know what they were doing. They didn't know the difference between a gross lease and a net lease and a full service and this and that. And, they would just do a deal directly with us, which is fine. I'm an honest, nice guy, and so that's fine, as are most leasing agents. But the problem is when you don't know what you're doing, honest guy that I am, I can't, screw my landlord or my owner, so to speak, by offering you, the tenant, more than I need to. So that's the crux of the matter. Even though you like me and I'm honest and good, unless you ask me for some free rent, I can't offer it to you. Unless you ask me for some money toward new carpet or paint, I can't just offer it to you. Then I'd be being dishonest to my boss. So that's the thing. And then also every single landlord lease that I've ever seen, you could make it better for the tenant. There are things in there that should be changed, and there are not things in there that a tenant should put in there. And so after seeing that many, many, many times, one day I just said, these people could really use my help. So I switched sides of the table, so to speak, and now I only represent businesses when they are out looking for space or negotiating their leases, or if they've done it themselves, like so many do, and then they get this 40-page lease on their desk and they go, oh my God, I don't know, I don't know I even how to read this thing or what these words mean. Okay, well, good. Then they can call me, email it to me, and I'll walk you through it and tell you what it means. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not doing a legal review, but I do this all day, every day, so we can talk about the business points of the lease and what this means and what that means and what you should probably add or change or whatever. So anyway, that's the crux of what I do, and that's what LeaseSmart is about, because 9 out of 10 small business people do not do it like they should. They lease dumb, quite honestly.
Well, and I would suspect that it's like with anything, you don't know what you don't know. And
exactly.
Then when you bring it to their attention and say, here's what this paragraph or this section means in real life, in real language, this could really mean this. And they probably are stopped in their tracks with the jaw dropped going, wow.
Oh, yeah.
So what's an example or two like that where you've come across where it was just in there, and maybe it wasn't maliciously in there, it just was in there, and your client, the tenant, was unaware of something, and before they sign it, you were able to bring it to their attention.
Right. Well, you've used some wonderful words there. The landlord is not being mean or malicious. They're just, doing the normal and doing what works out best for them. And one of the very first things you see in a lease, and it's very, unobnoxious language that says, all right, you're renting this store from me. You hereby say that you've inspected it and you're taking it as is, and you do your own fix-up and at your own cost. You're agreeing you're taking it as is. And so many people sign that. And what I'm saying is, no, you don't want to do that. What about hidden defects? What about when the tenant before you, who's been there for 10 years, now you're moving in, the zoning codes and building codes have changed. So, I mean, literally last week I had a client of mine, I was checking in to see how their build-out was doing, and it's like, oh, my God, it's a disaster. We had the people in here, and they found all kinds of extra wiring in the ceiling and in the conduits and this that we had to pay thousands of dollars to remove, and then they're looking at the exit lights and the exit signs, and they're not wired right. When you really look at them and look in, blah, 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 that's all changed, and so we got to bring it up to code. It's going to cost thousands of dollars that we didn't expect. And I said, whoa, hold on. I deal with that kind of stuff in my standard letter of intent, and I'm pretty sure we dealt with it in the lease. So you can imagine what a hero I felt like when I said, hey, I looked at their lease, called them back, said, hey, look at Exhibit B. It says that the landlord is going to make sure that your space is up to current code. Now, everything you've mentioned to me is in violation of the current code. So all you got to do is get back to the landlord and say, hey, landlord, no fault of yours. Sorry, but we discovered the property's not up to current code. Here's the work you have to do. And that was that. Landlord has to do it, and they're happy to do it. But if it didn't say that, they'd say, hey, well, sorry, you agreed to take it as is, not my problem.
So what was your client's reaction when you called them back with that revelation?
Well, of course, they think I'm a hero. They're feeling really smart that they're smart enough to use me. So we're all happy. Yeah. And then they refer me to other people. I mean, you're crazy. As it's doing this yourself is like, well, I'm going to drill my own teeth and operate on myself, and I'm going to do all my own legal work and all my own tax work. It's like doing this yourself is just as crazy. And I could give you tons of examples. I just don't know how many hours you have for this interview.
So here's a question. At what? Obviously, the point they need to come to you is before they sign the lease. But let's even think about even before that. How soon before they sign the lease? Because I'm sure that there's some back and forth. What if there's deadlines that someone has to meet, and when you give your recommendations and the business owner goes back to the landlord and say, hey, here's the things we need to edit, the landlord most probably doesn't say, sure, carte blanche, and we're done in 10 minutes. So what does that look like when you bring something up and your client then goes back to the landlord?
Right.
Is it 100% acceptance, which I'm sure not? Is it a back and forth? Does it get contentious? Does the landlord say, forget it and we're going to walk?
Well, all of that, but so much of it is reasonable. And sometimes I've gotten, every landlord is going to tell the tenant, this is our standard lease, we don't make changes. And if you don't know better, you go, well, okay, I guess I got to sign it. But I've never found that to be true. And in fact, sometimes it's like, all right, I hear you. You don't want us to make changes. But let me ask you, paragraph 32, it says blah, blah, blah. So if such and such happens, then does that mean, et cetera? And they go, no, we would never do that. I go, okay, well, then we need to change that clause because that's what could happen. So they end up making changes to a non-changeable lease, and they're fair people. I dealt with someone last month that said, we've been used this lease for 10 years now. No one has ever brought that up. And it's like, well, that's great. I need to raise my rates. I'm feeling like a hero now.
Yeah, really.
So, but anyway, to answer your question, we can do the most good for business owners when they come to us early on. When they first start looking for property, that's when they should contact us. And that should be a minimum 6 months early. And here's why. If you don't find the exact property that is exactly the layout you need, well, then you're going to have to hammer some nails, and that takes time. And before you do that, you're going to need permits. That takes time. That could take a month or two, or in a hot booming market, longer. That can just getting your permits. Before you do that, you have to have plans drawn up. That can take a month or so. Before you do that, you have to have a lease signed or at least in motion. That can take a month or two. So you start stacking all these month or twos up, and, 6 months is good. And if it's a big deal, we might want 9 months. And the other good thing about that is it gives us plenty of leverage. So when we're negotiating with the landlord, they know that if we come to loggerheads, okay, fine, we'll go elsewhere. But if it's last moment, we lose leverage. And by the way, lease renewals are a negotiable event. Unless, of course, you wait the week before your lease expires and then you say, oh, gee, we'd really like this or that. And then the landlord's going to say, no, just, stay if you want, and if not, move. Well, they know you can't move. So that if you want to do something different, and when you say, like more incentives or an adjustment to rent or so many things maybe get taken off the lease guarantee, then you need to do that 6 months in advance also. So they know you can move if you can't come to an agreement. And what I'll do is even if we know we want to stay, I'll talk to the landlord and say, look, staying is an option and moving is an option. What can you do for us to stay? And the timing is really important, and getting us involved early is important. And this is not always contentious either. What I typically do is we'll find a spot, and out of all the choices, we'll like one better for some reason. There's always reasons, amenities and rental rates and access and parking. There's always a reason in my mind that one site is really the best. And so I don't give the landlord a hard time. I'll get with that landlord and say, hey, your property could be our number one choice with these terms. And then we give them a letter of intent and say, if you can do this, then, we can proceed. And we're not going to, because some people negotiate and say, hey, we're looking at 5 deals. What are you going to do for us? And, that may be a fine way to go in some markets, but I find it works for me to say, hey, under these terms, you're the deal for us. What can you do? And then we negotiate back and forth and, go from there. And it's usually a pretty pleasant experience.
Yeah, what you said there made me think of the positioning you are in when you're already a tenant as compared to you're trying to get into the lease. So you're maybe that's an untapped opportunity for these lease renewals. So potentially, you might just think, it was fine before, now it's going to be fine now, signed, done, and it's off my plate. But maybe coming to you for a lease renewal, you're in a really good position because they like you, they trust you, you're in for X number of years, and they say, oh, well, I could lose this good tenant. I need to, whatever the case is.
Right,
do you find that's the case as well?
Well, most landlords consider that you belong to them. Once you're in the space, they really like it when, you have an option to renew and you just, send them a letter that says, I hereby exercise my option to renew, and then we're done. But they hate it when we get involved real early and negotiate something different. But, fair's fair, and there's many reasons. It's like, well, is that air conditioner that's making a lot of noise? Maybe we should get the landlord to replace that or fix it before we decide to stay, because that can be thousands of dollars. Or what if our rental rate has outgrown what the market is? We agreed to a certain stepped-up rent every year for the last 5 or 10 years, and now it's higher than it should be. What do you do about that? And, in fact, I had a client one time that called me and said, oh, gee, Craig, we're in trouble here. You do commercial real estate. Give me some advice. What should we do? Their lease expired, and they had some pretty fancy build-out and pretty special space. Their lease expired in like a month, and they said, our rent is actually higher than it should be, but the landlord wants us to pay even more, and we don't think that's fair. And it's like, well, first of all, fair means nothing. They want steadily increasing rent is what they want. That's what they do, rightly so. So my first job was, first of all, they should have called me way earlier. They didn't, and that's fairly typical, I guess. And so my first job was to get with the landlord and say, hey, we know it's a pain for us to move, a real pain. You know it, I know it, we all know it, but we will move. We can move and we will move, even if my clients have to work out of their houses for a while, if we can't come to an agreement. Because, I've looked at the market and we don't want to pay more rent. We want to pay less rent. We think we're paying too much. And and also that air conditioner is about to break and this and that. So once I convinced, and they had dealing directly landlord to tenant, it's like, nope, sign it and move if you want to, but, this is our deal. Well, once I got involved and convinced them that, in fact, we would move, and it was kind of odd space, too, and I told the landlord, that, hey, you don't have to admit this, but I know and you know that if we move out of this space, it's going to sit vacant for a year, maybe longer. This is odd space. And we're in there, and so you don't have to say you agree, but I know that you know that that's true. You know?
Yeah.
So the first thing was to convince them we will move. And the reason is, we might want to, in fact, we will be wanting to sell this business someday fairly soon. And if we got to pay a lot more in rent, that affects the income of the business, which affects the value of the business. So this extra rent is a very real thing and will affect our retirement, and how much the business sells for. So I convinced them we would move unless they could get serious. And wouldn't you know it, I can't promise this to everybody, but we got the rent down instead of up, and we got a lot more stuff, like some fresh paint, and carpet, and air conditioning replacements and things like that. And it's, all part of the negotiation, but convincing them that we could move. And then, so I guess we go back to do it yourself and suffer the consequences,
Yeah, and to me, I just think this is such a I kind of liken it to when we go online and we transact a purchase, which we do, all the time.
Right.
How about those boxes that says I have read and agreed to the terms?
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Everyone just goes click submit.
Of
and
course.
Once in a blue moon, I find one that you try that, and they go something to the effect of a pop-up box that goes, we can tell you didn't scroll through and read the whole thing, then you have to move the slider to bar to trick it. But we don't read everything, and then we certainly don't understand everything.
No.
And I think that is so pre-programmed into our psyches that this is just an untapped opportunity for small businesses that are getting into leases. They just don't realize this is out there. So
they don't know it's negotiable. They're told it's not. And here's the thing: it's human nature. When you call on the sign and you meet the leasing agent or the landlord for the space, they are usually really nice and really smart, really honest, probably attractive, and they make a great friend. So you like them, and we like to do business with people we like. So it's just human nature that you just want to, take the easy route. Let's just work with this really nice person, and we'll do this deal. And so I understand that completely, and that's why, I would say at least 90% currently of the mom-and-pop businesses just do the deal themselves. But again, that super nice, honest person, and they are that, and I love them, they can't give you the best deal without being dishonest to their boss. So that's the crux of the matter, is you've got to realize that everything in that lease is negotiable. The things they ask for, you don't have to do. And if we have time, I'll give you a super quick rundown of examples. One would be like the personal guarantee. You don't have to guarantee that lease personally. And if you do, you could limit it in time or money or some way. Security deposits, you can do less. There's a thing called a holdover clause that says if you stay in the space after your lease is up and we haven't come to some agreement, you have to pay, many of them say you have to pay double rent. Well, we get that lowered all the time just by asking. Or one of my other pet peeves would be, let's say there's a big fire or hurricane or some disaster. How long does the landlord have before they have to fix up that property and require you to come back? I mean, it's completely uninhabitable, but you can't go rent elsewhere because you've got to come back to this space when it's done. And what's the timing of that? Sometimes it's unlimited. And so all kinds of stuff. And if you just say, okay, nice person, thanks for sending me this lease, I know you would never screw me. Well, they're not really screwing you. They're just doing what is normal to them. And many of these things they never really even thought about. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. And the first big lesson is, it can be negotiated. It should be negotiated. And I've dealt with titans of industry, super duper smart. They still don't know this business. Unless you're in it all the time, it's a specialized business, much more than you think, and you shouldn't be doing it yourself. In fact, that's why if you think about it, the bigger companies, they all have their own in-house real estate departments or hire the big companies to represent them. It's the small mom and pops or the younger companies that haven't figured it out yet that, whoa, this is something special here that needs some special care.
Yeah, I mean, huge aha. I feel that what you've gone through here and explaining, I think typically, the question would be, what's the biggest mistake that companies make when searching for a new facility? But what I would ask is, what's the biggest, win? What's the biggest positive thing that a company is able to achieve when you point out some of these things? Thinking on that positive side, like, hey, the number one thing I look for when I look in a lease is what?
Well, I don't really have a one thing. There's there's the top things that I cover them all. But obviously we want to make sure the rent is fair and that we got the right amount of. Well, one of the things that happens too is, I guess it could be a top one, is when does your rent start? Sometimes it's like sign here and your rent starts. Or your free rent period starts right now. Well, we need time to get planning and permitting and this and that. I've actually heard of businesses that went out of business before they were even in business, because what I mean by that, they signed a lease, they started paying rent, and lo and behold, they couldn't do their build-out without the right kind of permits or this or that, and it sucked them dry. They were paying rent for too long and ran out of money. And, that kind of stuff you just got to be careful with. And sometimes the zoning isn't even right. It's like you signed a lease on space that you're not even allowed to go in there. And so there's just so many things that we check. But and I don't know if I've answered your question right. The one big item is what kind of throws me. The big advantage, because it's everything. It's cash, money, and then it's also lessening of risk. So many people think that they sign a 5-year lease, there's an event there at signing, and then you got to wait 5 years and it's over before you can do anything. And we always try to build in flexibility. So if you need to expand or you need to contract or there's other problems, it's handled. So the lease is like a living thing, not it rears its head at the end of the lease. It's something, and you can also negotiate even if you don't have an agreement. You need to be aware. Keep your landlord informed of what's happening. If you're not doing well, you need to let the landlord know. Maybe they got someone else that'll take the space. They'll work with you. I had a landlord call me one time, just kind of commiserating about the state of the economy at the time, and he was talking about his shopping center and a tenant that had just left. And he go, if that tenant had just let me know, I'd have let him stay in the space for free until we found a new tenant. But instead, the tenant just left in the middle of the night, locked up, said, here's your keys. And it's like, no, the landlord is not, this evil person. We need to communicate with him, and it'll solve so many things.
I think one big takeaway that I'm hearing is that there are so many things that you don't even know to ask for, that if you did ask for, that maybe chances are you can get all or part of what you asked. And, it's just opportunity left sitting there that you don't even know to explore. And if they say no, they say no. But if you ask and the landlord says sure, that could save time, money, hassle, expense, all of that. So
you don't know what you don't know. That's my biggest marketing challenge is people think they can do it, and I don't think I've ever seen an example where they could. I could challenge you to send me your lease, or have anybody send me a lease that they think is just fine, and let's put me to the test, and see. Well, fine, if as long as this and that and the other thing don't happen, then it's fine,
Yep. Well, hey, it was wonderful getting to know you. What's the best way that people can learn more about your service?
Well, I have a website, LeaseSmart, all one word, LeaseSmart.com. And then I actually have my own podcast where I cover these issues in detail every week, a new one every week, which is Corporate Real Estate Podcast. You can find that on iTunes or wherever. And I really enjoy doing that. And so those if you're driving your car right now, I can give you a phone number, 800-962-2419. And, I'm there for you. I love doing this. I'd do it even if I didn't get paid. By the way.
Don't say that.
When we do the site selection lease negotiation, we are free. We're sharing in the leasing fees that the landlord is paying. So it's like, I'm going to get you a much, much better deal than you can yourself, and you don't even have to pay for that. It's like you're crazy not to use a tenant rep, which is what I am.
Excellent.
It's really frustrating.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for your time, and we can visit your website, LeaseSmart.com, and learn more, and we just really thank you for taking the time out of your day today.
Sure, happy to do it.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.